dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, affirmative action, college graduation rates, and the election of President Barack Obama. African Americans have made major social and political strides in the past 50 years. Still, less than 20% of African Americans now believe the United States has achieved Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream of equality. The Post's Michael Fletcher recently compiled an oral history of the March for the Smithsonian. He joins us now to talk about the legacy of that day and the questions that still remain. We've got some poll numbers here that show, and this was a poll, I should say, that was taken right after the Trayvon Martin verdict, which is a real flashpoint for many African Americans. African Americans, only 20% feel like they are judged by their character first, not their skin color. For whites, 60% say it's character first, not skin color. Hispanics, 54%. What do you make of those numbers? You talked about, sort of the arc of justice, the arc bending towards justice. Right. It seems that it hasn't bent enough in terms of how
bent enough. I mean, there have been clear improvements. There's no denying that. You can look at the high school graduation rates, the number of African Americans who now have college degrees, things like that. The move to the middle class, more African Americans are in the middle class than certainly 50 years ago.
I think it's 1 in 10 now.
1 in 10, but for whites it's 22%. So I think African Americans feel this disparity. There's a continued disparity, A. And B, there's lingering discrimination. People don't like to talk about it. The president doesn't like to talk about it. But every time you have auditors go out and, for example, and look for apartments that you have identically matched, white and black people.
Right.
White people get called back more. You have that with jobs. It's clear. You look at unemployment rates for African Americans. Have been in double digits as an average for the last 50 years.
That's right.
And not just for, and people say, well, that would reflect educational differences. To some degree it does. But right now, in 2012, blacks with some college had a higher unemployment rate than white high school dropouts. So I think people sense this lingering discrimination despite all of the great gains we've seen.
And what does that mean in terms of public policy?
See, that's the big question. So many people, look at our, the first African American president and say, and this guy should be targeting more of his policies exactly at this problem.
Right.
Sort of have
but
race
some
specific.
black people say he's not the president of Black America, he's the president of all America. Right,
exactly. I mean, you have a split there,
Yeah.
but you do have those who argue that, for example, when he did the stimulus, I mean, obviously you can't do race specific programs because they wouldn't be constitutional, but maybe he should have had a public works hiring program, something where you circumvent the private market, and
you can do it by zip code targeting.
You can do different things like that, and President Obama hasn't gone close to anything like that. He didn't believe in kind of just having a big public works program for the stimulus. He doesn't believe in necessarily racially targeting things, but he'll point to things like his health care reform plan, his moves to improve college access. Say these things are going to help everyone who's kind of working class and middle class, and helps the middle class achieve. And he said, you know what? Disproportionately, African Americans will benefit from these things. So you have that kind of tension. But people look and say, you know what? It's not quite enough. And, but I think the larger picture is, and economics, I think, is the key kind of tension point here. The economy has changed for all Americans. It's really tough. This March occurred during kind of a period of American dominance, American corporate dominance. We were the big kahuna, we were a manufacturing center. But now we're in an era of global competition. It's harder, our economy has become more uncertain. Inequality has grown. So not only are black middle class and working class people not seeing big pay increases, neither are whites. And there's a group of people at the top who are doing well, and that's a mostly white group.
Right.
But it's a small group nonetheless. So I mean, you have all these things you have to balance. Exactly.
There also is a debate in, I guess, black culture about sort of black culture's role in this. What do you make of that? I mean, I think Don Lemon has talked about it. Bill Cosby, it's the whole idea.
I think you get many African Americans, and there's a lot of controversy, like when Don Lemon or Bill Cosby talks about it, but I'm always surprised at that because it's really kind of a kitchen table conversation for many African Americans. People say, oh, we have to do better. A kid can't go looking for a job with his pants down. below his waist and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Including Obama, right? He went to Morehouse famously and sort of chastised them in some ways.
And it's even gotten the president, some backlash. I mean, some African Americans say, he's a little too scolding.
Yeah.
Of African Americans, but I think he's reflecting a view that's out there, and a view that I think lives alongside those who say we need more race-specific things. I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. African Americans have to be ready for opportunity, but we should be presented with more opportunity, people would argue.
What do you think of Obama's arc as president in terms of civil rights? The articles were out today that suggested he is in his second term freer to talk about civil rights. He gave that 18-minute, seemingly off the top of his head, a press conference and talk about Trayvon Martin. What's your sense?
I mean, I think he's kind of finding his voice in this kind of thing. We remember famously the Skip Gates incident of his first term, and I think he was kind of like a hornet's nest.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he said something that
summit and
exactly, but he said something that I think in the moment, and probably even for 24 hours afterwards, felt like was uncontroversial.
Yeah.
And it created this whole thing, saying that the Cambridge police officer had acted stupidly, and essentially he didn't use the word profile, but it's suggesting that he had profiled Skip Gates at his own home, and thought he was breaking into his own house and that sort of thing. And so he pulled back from that, and I think he was like a little scorched by it, like whoa, it's hot.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But now I think he's found his voice, even though you can argue that even his very moving remarks that day in the White House briefing room and his identification with Trayvon was, it was remarkable. But in a sense, when you got to the end of that, and his policy prescriptions, they were unremarkable.
Right.
He says, well, we have to do something about stand your ground laws. Which I think a lot of people would agree with that. But George Zimmerman didn't invoke stand your ground in his trial.
Right.
It was part of the backdrop.
Yeah.
But it didn't get invoked in court. So that's I think where it falls apart a little bit for some people, because and the real truth is, it's hard. I mean, what do you do? What is that silver bullet?
Yeah.
What is that piece of policy that's going to sort of change things? So much of this is kind of people's attitudes.
Changing hearts and minds.
Yeah, exactly.
What is his challenge today? I mean, one of the things, you look back at the March on Washington, and one of the things you see is that Martin Luther King was able to place Black America's struggle within the larger context of American history, right? Yeah. This isn't just a Black problem, it's an American problem, and there are American solutions. What is Obama's task today in terms of, I mean, he can't really follow Martin Luther King, right?
He can't, and it feels like he has a tightrope to walk. I mean, because I think he's going to talk about the changes to voting laws in the South and the idea that we have to have open access to the ballot. But when you have these voter ID laws come up, I don't think there's a clear consensus in the country that these are a bad thing.
Yeah.
There are people who will say, people should be able to get a government ID and go vote. Now, I can argue against it. Many people will make strong arguments against it, that there are many people who don't have driver's licenses, don't have access to get these things. But it doesn't feel like the poll taxes of old, I think, to a lot of the public mind. So it's hard. I think it's the challenge for him is to kind of raise issues like that and make people understand why they remain so important to African Americans. And I think the larger thing, and I don't know that he'll talk about this today, it's back to the economics thing. Right. I mean, because the March on Washington was the march for jobs and freedom. The freedom part we have to some degree.
Right.
We could talk about
in terms of there are no laws.
In terms of
state-sponsored,
sort of barriers have been toppled. But how do you get to equality in this society? And that's an economic question, and it's a tough question because of how complex the economy has become.
Right.
And and that's something I think he has to work, and he's trying to work on. He's again, improving college access is something.
It's right, education.
Yeah, education, but even that's been undermined as he's put more federal money in. State money's been pulled out.
Yeah.
College costs have increased. We've heard him talk about that lately, trying to find ways to keep colleges from raising tuition and other fees, other costs so much.
And you have AG Eric Holder also weighing in more recently, being a more robust civil rights figure as well.
Well, exactly, and again, it's back to the same issues. I mean, a lot of the criminal justice issues, the ideas, the racial profiling stuff, and the voting rights stuff. These are the things that I think feel like the clearest kind of pieces of unfairness to people that he's going after.
And I mean, it seems to me in some ways years from now, Obama, there'll be something about his symbolism and his ability or inability to change the way people talk and think about race and inequality. It seems like he's using his bully pulpit in the absence of having any real power on the Hill and with Congress.
I think the legacy that he'll probably, I don't know if he thinks this or not, but it feels like his very presence, the way he handled the presidency, I think that's going to be the lasting legacy, if you will. It's a guy who's never walked away from the question of being an African American. I mean, he's a biracial man. He doesn't have to identify as a black, but he does, right? And he always has, at least ever since he's been an adult. And he's carried that as President of the United States. I think that will mean a lot. And I think that alone has a transformative effect on attitudes across the country. And I think that will be the biggest legacy that he leaves behind when it comes to race.
And that is the seed planted, right, 50 years ago.
Oh, exactly. I mean, think about it. 50 years ago, if Dr. King had stood there and said, we'll have a black president standing on this spot, 50 years from now, commemorating this great event, everybody would have thought, okay, he's been dreaming, but that's a big dream.
Right.
Exactly.
Michael Fletcher, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.